The rain that poured down on Florence Fairmont's head as she stumbled through the muddy streets of Bonanza, Colorado, felt like God himself was weeping for her, though she doubted the Almighty had much sympathy left for a woman so thoroughly cast aside by her own husband. Her feet dragged through the thick mud of the street, her worn boots barely holding together as she clutched her swollen belly with one trembling hand and pressed the other against a hitching post to keep herself upright. The fever that had been burning through her body for 3 days made everything swim before her eyes, turning the rough wooden buildings of the mining town into wavering shadows. She could still hear Victor's voice screaming at her to get out, still feel the shove that had sent her stumbling off their porch into the rain, still see his face twisted with disgust as he told her the baby she carried probably was not even his, though she had never so much as looked at another man since their wedding day 2 years ago. The street was mostly empty in the downpour, which struck her as both a blessing and a curse. At least no one was there to see her shame, but neither was there anyone to help as her knees finally gave out and she collapsed against the side of a building, sliding down into the mud. The sickness that had been plaguing her for weeks seemed to have settled deep in her chest, making every breath a struggle. She coughed, tasting copper in her mouth, and wondered if this was how she would die, alone in the mud with her unborn child still moving weakly inside her. She was only 22 years old, but she felt ancient, worn down to nothing by the months of verbal abuse that had finally culminated in Victor throwing her out into a storm. Through the haze of fever and rain, she became aware of bootsteps approaching, heavy and deliberate. She tried to lift her head but could not manage it, her neck feeling as though it were made of wet rope. The footsteps stopped beside her and she heard a sharp intake of breath. Jesus Christ! The voice was male, rough with surprise and something that might have been concern. Strong hands gripped her shoulders, and she felt herself being lifted with surprising gentleness. "Madam, can you hear me?" Florence tried to answer but only managed a weak whimper. Her body felt like it was on fire despite the cold rain soaking through her thin dress. She was dimly aware of being carried, of the rain suddenly stopping as they moved under some kind of shelter, of a door opening and warmth washing over her. "I need blankets and hot water," the voice called out, and there was an answering shout from somewhere else in the building. Florence felt herself being lowered onto something soft, softer than anything she had felt in months. Victor had insisted they save money by sleeping on a thin mattress stuffed with straw, though he seemed to have no trouble spending their money on whiskey at the saloon. Hands were working at her boots, pulling them off her frozen feet. Someone was wrapping her in blankets, and she wanted to protest that she would get everything muddy and wet, that whoever this was would be angry with her for ruining their nice things, but she could not form the words. A cool hand pressed against her forehead, and she heard a low curse. "She is burning up. How long has she been out there?" The voice was closer now, and Florence managed to crack her eyes open just enough to see a face hovering over her. It was a man's face, square-jawed and weathered by sun and wind, with eyes the color of the Colorado sky on a clear day. He looked to be in his late 20s, with dark brown hair that fell almost to his shoulders, and a few days' worth of stubble darkening his jaw. "Found her collapsed against the mercantile," he was saying to someone else. "She is with child and sick as I have ever seen anyone. We need to get the doctor." "Doc Henderson is out at the Morrison Ranch," another voice replied, older and gruff. "One of their hands got kicked by a horse. He will not be back until tomorrow at the earliest." The man with the blue eyes cursed again, more creatively this time. "Then I will have to do what I can myself. Get me more blankets and put some broth on to heat. She looks half-starved." Florence wanted to explain that Victor had been keeping the food locked up, claiming she was eating too much and that the baby did not need as much as she thought. But the darkness was pulling at her, and she let it take her under. When she surfaced again, she had no idea how much time had passed. The room around her was dim, lit only by a low fire burning in a stone fireplace. She was still wrapped in blankets, but she was wearing different clothes now, a soft cotton nightgown that was far too large for her. The fever still burned through her, but someone had been wiping her face with a cool cloth. She could feel the dampness on her skin. "You are awake." The voice came from beside the bed, and she turned her head with effort to see the blue-eyed man sitting in a chair next to her. He looked exhausted, with deep shadows under his eyes. "How are you feeling?" "Sick," Florence managed to croak out, her voice barely recognizable even to herself. "Where am I?" "My place," he said, leaning forward. "I have a ranch about a mile outside Bonanza proper." "You collapsed in town during the storm yesterday. I am Quentin Irving." Yesterday. She had been unconscious for at least a full day then. "Florence Fairmont," she whispered. "I should go. My husband will be angry." Something flickered across Quentin's face, something dark and dangerous. "Your husband is the one who threw you out into that storm," he said, and it was not a question. "I went looking for him this morning. He said you left of your own accord and he did not want you back. Told me I could do what I wanted with you." The words should have hurt, but Florence found she had no tears left for Victor Fairmont. She had cried them all in the months leading up to this. "He said the baby is not his," she said dully. "It is. I have never been with anyone else. But he decided I was unfaithful and nothing I said could convince him otherwise." Quentin's jaw tightened. "I believe you," he said simply, and those 3 words meant more to Florence than anything she had heard in months. "Right now, you need to focus on getting well. You have pneumonia or close to it, and the baby needs you to be strong." "I cannot pay you," Florence said, shame flooding through her. "I have nothing. No money, no family. Victor took everything." "I did not ask for payment," Quentin replied. "You needed help and I was there. That is all there is to it." He stood up, moving to a small table where a bowl sat steaming. "I have broth. You need to eat something. You are too thin and the baby needs nourishment." He helped her sit up, propping pillows behind her back with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rough appearance. He was a big man, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of strength that came from years of hard work. His hands were calloused but careful as he held the spoon to her lips. Florence wanted to protest that she could feed herself, but she was not sure that was true, so she let him help her. The broth was rich and warm, settling into her empty stomach like a blessing. She managed half the bowl before exhaustion pulled at her again. "Sleep," Quentin said, easing her back down. "I will be here if you need anything." "Why are you doing this?" Florence asked, fighting to keep her eyes open. "You do not know me." Quentin was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes distant. "My sister died in childbirth 5 years ago," he said finally. "Her husband had left her, and she tried to manage on her own. By the time I found her, it was too late. I swore I would never let that happen to another woman if I could help it." He looked back at Florence, his expression fierce. "So you will stay here and you will get well, and you will have your baby safely. That is all there is to it." Florence wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could not accept such charity, but the darkness was pulling at her again, and Quentin's words had wrapped around her like a shield. For the first time in months, she felt safe, and she let that feeling carry her into sleep. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of fever and exhaustion. Quentin was a constant presence, changing the cool cloths on her forehead, coaxing her to eat, helping her sit up when the coughing fits came. He never made her feel ashamed of her weakness or her dependence on him. Sometimes she would wake to find him dozing in the chair beside her bed, his head tipped back and his face relaxed in sleep. He looked younger when he slept, less careworn, and Florence found herself studying the lines of his face in the firelight. On the fourth day, the fever finally broke. Florence woke feeling weak and wrung out, but clear-headed for the first time since Victor had thrown her out. The room was brighter now, morning sunlight streaming through a window she had not noticed before. She was alone, but she could hear movement somewhere else in the house, the sound of boots on wooden floors and the clatter of dishes. She pushed herself up slowly, expecting her body to protest, but while she was weak, the burning sickness had left her. Her hand went to her belly and she felt the baby move inside her, a strong kick that brought tears to her eyes. Still alive. They had both survived. The door opened and Quentin came in carrying a tray. He stopped when he saw her sitting up, and a slow smile spread across his face. It transformed him, softening the hard lines and making him almost handsome. "You are looking better," he said, setting the tray down on the small table beside the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Florence said, and was surprised to find it was true. "Weak, but better. The fever is gone." "I noticed." Quentin pulled the chair closer and sat down. "I was starting to worry. You have been fighting that sickness for days now." He studied her face. "You are still too thin, but we can work on that. I have eggs and bacon here and some bread with butter. Think you can manage it?" Florence's stomach growled in response, and she felt her cheeks heat with embarrassment. Quentin just laughed, a rich, warm sound. "I will take that as a yes." He helped her with the tray, and this time Florence was able to feed herself, though her hands trembled with weakness. The food was simple but delicious, and she ate every bite, surprising herself with her appetite. Quentin watched her with satisfaction. "When you are strong enough, I will show you around the place," he said. "It is not much, just a small ranch. I run cattle mostly and have a few horses. I do well enough for myself." "I need to find work," Florence said, setting down her fork. "I cannot keep imposing on you like this. Once I am stronger, I can clean or cook or something to earn my keep until after the baby comes. And then I will need to find a place of my own." Quentin's expression turned serious. "Florence, you are not imposing, and you are not going anywhere until you and the baby are both healthy. After that, we can talk about what comes next. But right now, you need to focus on getting your strength back." He paused. "When is the baby due?" Florence felt her cheeks warm again. It seemed strange to discuss such intimate matters with a man she barely knew, even one who had been caring for her so tenderly. "Another 2 months, I think. Maybe a bit less. It is hard to say for certain." Quentin nodded. "Then you will stay here until the baby comes and you have recovered from the birth. This is not up for debate." His tone was firm but not unkind. "After that, if you want to leave, I will help you get set up somewhere. But I will not have you trying to manage on your own while you are with child and still recovering from pneumonia." Florence felt tears prick her eyes. She could not remember the last time anyone had cared about her welfare, had wanted to help her without expecting something in return. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she whispered. Quentin reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and solid. "Because you need kindness," he said simply. "And because it is the right thing to do. My mother raised me better than to turn away someone in need." He squeezed her hand gently. "Besides, I have plenty of room here and I could use the company. It gets lonely out here by myself." Something in his tone made Florence look at him more closely. "You live alone?" "For the past 5 years, yes. After my sister died, I left my family's place back in Kansas and came out here to start fresh. Bought this land with money I had saved and built the ranch up from nothing." He released her hand and sat back. "It has been good for me, the hard work, but it is a solitary life." "Do you ever go into town?" "For supplies and such, yes, but I keep to myself mostly. The people in Bonanza know me as the fellow who has the ranch up the North Road. I do business with them, but I am not much for socializing." He smiled slightly. "Though old Pete at the general store is friendly enough. He is the one who helped me get you back here that first night." Florence nodded slowly, trying to piece together her fragmented memories of that night. "I think I remember another voice. That was Pete. He was closing up the store when I found you, helped me get you into the wagon and gave me extra blankets." Quentin stood up. "I should let you rest. You have done well today, but you should not overdo it. Sleep, and I will check on you later." But Florence found she did not want to sleep. She had been unconscious or dozing for days, and now that her mind was clear, she wanted answers. "Quentin, what did Victor say when you spoke to him, exactly?" Quentin's expression darkened. "Are you sure you want to know?" "Yes." He sighed and sat back down. "He said you had run off and good riddance to you. Said the baby you were carrying was probably not his and he was well rid of you both. When I told him you were sick and needed help, he said he did not care what happened to you." Quentin's hands clenched into fists. "I wanted to hit him, but it would not have helped matters. So I left. But I made sure everyone in the saloon heard what he had said. Victor Fairmont will not have a good reputation in this town after the way he treated you." Florence felt a strange mixture of pain and relief. Pain that the man she had married could be so cruel, but relief that she was finally free of him. "He was not always like that," she said quietly. "When we first married, he was kind, but then he started drinking more and gambling. We lost money and he started to blame me for everything that went wrong. When I told him I was with child, he accused me of trapping him." "He is a fool," Quentin said bluntly, "and you are better off without him." Florence knew he was right, but it still hurt. She had loved Victor once, had believed in the life they would build together. To have it all fall apart so completely was devastating. "I do not know what I am going to do," she admitted. "I have no family, no money, no way to support a child on my own." "We will figure it out," Quentin said, and the certainty in his voice made her want to believe him. "But that is a problem for later. Right now, you need to focus on getting well." Over the following weeks, Florence slowly regained her strength. Quentin proved to be a patient and attentive caretaker, always ready with a steadying hand when she got dizzy, or a warm meal when she needed to eat. He never made her feel like a burden, even when she needed help with the simplest tasks. As she grew stronger, he began showing her around the ranch, taking her outside for short walks when the weather was clear. The ranch itself was modest but well maintained. The house was small but sturdy, built of logs with a stone fireplace and 2 bedrooms. Quentin had given her his room and was sleeping in the main area on a bedroll. Despite her protests, he insisted it was more appropriate this way, and that he had slept in far worse places during his years working cattle drives. Outside, there was a barn that housed his horses, a chicken coop, and several corrals for the cattle. The property stretched out in rolling grassland, backed by mountains in the distance. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that made Florence's heart ache. She had grown up in a city back east, and Victor had brought her to Colorado promising adventure. She had found hardship instead, but looking out over Quentin's land, she could almost see the promise that had drawn her west in the first place. "It is beautiful here," she said one afternoon as they stood by the corral watching the horses. She was 5 weeks into her stay now, and her belly had grown noticeably larger. The baby was active, kicking frequently, and Florence had felt her body begin to prepare for the birth that was coming. "It is," Quentin agreed. He was leaning against the fence, his eyes on the horizon. "When I first came here, it was just empty land. I built everything you see with my own hands. It felt good, creating something from nothing. You must be proud of what you have accomplished." "I am," he said simply. He glanced at her, and there was something in his expression that made her breath catch. "Florence, I have been thinking. After the baby comes, you are going to need help, and I could use someone to help run this place. What if you stayed?" Florence's heart stuttered. "Stayed here?" "Not as a charity case," Quentin said quickly. "As a partner. You could help with the house and the cooking, maybe tend the garden and the chickens. In exchange, you would have a place to live and security for you and the baby." He looked away, seemingly embarrassed. "I know it is not a conventional arrangement, but these are not conventional circumstances." Florence was quiet, thinking. It was a generous offer, more than generous, but she worried about what people would think and what it might mean. "Quentin, people would talk. An unmarried woman living with an unmarried man. It would damage your reputation." "I do not care much about my reputation," Quentin replied, "but I care about you and the baby being safe." He hesitated. "There is another option. We could marry. It would be a marriage of convenience, to give you and the child my name and protection. I would not expect anything from you beyond companionship and help running the ranch. It would be a business arrangement, nothing more." Florence felt her face flush. Marriage, to Quentin. The idea was both terrifying and strangely appealing. She had been married before, and it had ended in disaster. But Quentin was nothing like Victor. He was kind and steady, and he had asked her, not demanded. "That is a serious offer," she managed to say. "It is, and you do not have to answer now. Think about it. But know that the offer stands, whether you want to marry me or just stay on as my partner in running this place. Either way, you and the baby will be safe here." Florence looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the sincerity in his eyes. He meant every word. And slowly, she realized that somewhere over the past weeks, she had come to care for this quiet, kind man who had saved her life. Not love, not yet, but something that could grow into it given time. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Take all the time you need," Quentin said, and his smile was gentle. But as the days passed, Florence found herself thinking about his offer constantly. The baby was due soon, and she needed to make a decision about her future. She watched Quentin as he went about his work, noting the way he was always gentle with the animals, the way he never raised his voice in anger, the way he asked her opinion on things rather than simply telling her what to do. He was everything Victor had not been, and she found herself drawn to him in ways that surprised her. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Florence made her decision. "Quentin, I have thought about your offer." He looked up from the piece of leather he had been working on, his expression carefully neutral. "And I would like to accept both parts of your offer. I think a marriage would be best for the baby's sake, to give the child a legitimate name and a father." She met his eyes. "If you are still willing." Something flashed across Quentin's face, something that looked almost like relief. "I am willing," he said. "We can go into town tomorrow and arrange it with the preacher. It does not have to be a big affair. Just the legal part, making it official." "That would be fine," Florence said. Her heart was pounding, but she felt steady in her decision. This was the right choice for her and for the baby. "Quentin, I want you to know that I will do my best to be a good wife to you, to help you with the ranch and make a home here." "I know you will," Quentin said softly. He set aside his work and came to sit beside her. "Florence, I want you to know that this does not have to be just a business arrangement. If in time feelings develop between us, I would welcome that, but I will not pressure you. You have been through enough without me adding to your burdens." Florence felt warmth spread through her chest. She reached out and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I think feelings are already developing," she admitted quietly. "You have been so kind to me, Quentin. You saved my life and the baby's life. I do not know how I can ever repay that." "You do not owe me anything," Quentin said, squeezing her hand. "But I am glad to hear you say that. because I have come to care for you quite a bit over these past weeks. More than I probably should have, given the circumstances." They sat together in comfortable silence, hands joined, watching the fire burn low. Florence felt a sense of peace settle over her that she had not felt in months, maybe longer. With Quentin, she felt safe. She felt valued. And she was beginning to feel something else, something warm and tentative that might, in time, become love. The next morning they rode into Bonanza together in Quentin's wagon. Florence wore the best dress she had, which was not saying much, but Quentin had assured her she looked fine. The town was busy with mid-morning activity, people going about their business, wagons rolling down the muddy Main Street. Florence felt nervous as they made their way to the small church at the end of town, wondering what people would think when they learned she was marrying Quentin. But the preacher, a kindly older man named Reverend Matthews, asked no awkward questions. He seemed to recognize Florence, and his expression was sympathetic. "Miss Fairmont," he said gently. "Or I suppose it is Mrs. Fairmont still, legally speaking. I heard about what happened with Victor." "I am sorry." "Thank you, Reverend," Florence said quietly, "but I am here to put that behind me. Quentin has asked me to marry him, and I have accepted." Reverend Matthews looked between them, his expression thoughtful. "I see. And you are both certain this is what you want?" "Marriage is a serious commitment, not to be entered into lightly." "I am certain," Quentin said firmly. "Florence needs a home and protection, and I am happy to provide both. We may have come to this arrangement in an unconventional way, but I believe we can build a good life together." "I am certain too," Florence added. "Quentin has been nothing but kind to me. I trust him, and I want to make this official." The Reverend nodded slowly. "Very well. I will need 2 witnesses. Let me see if I can find someone." As it turned out, finding witnesses was easier than expected. Pete from the general store was happy to stand up for them, and his wife Martha came along as well. Martha fussed over Florence, exclaiming over her condition and insisting she should be sitting down, not standing for a long ceremony. "We will keep it brief," Reverend Matthews assured her, and he was true to his word. The ceremony was simple and quick, with no frills or flourishes. But when Quentin took Florence's hand and promised to love and cherish her, to protect her and provide for her, Florence felt tears prick her eyes. And when it was her turn to make her own vows, she meant every word. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Matthews said, smiling. "Quentin, you may kiss your bride." Quentin hesitated, his eyes searching Florence's face as if asking permission. She nodded slightly, and he leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to her lips. It was brief and chaste, but Florence felt warmth bloom in her chest. This was her husband now. Not Victor, who had thrown her away, but Quentin, who had saved her. After the ceremony, Pete and Martha insisted on treating them to lunch at the town's small restaurant. It was a modest meal, but it felt celebratory, and Florence found herself laughing at Pete's stories about his years working in the mines before he opened the general store. It felt good to laugh, to be part of normal human interaction again after so many weeks of isolation. As they were finishing their meal, the door to the restaurant opened and Victor Fairmont walked in. He stopped short when he saw Florence, his eyes going wide. Then his expression hardened. "So it is true," he said loudly, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. "You did run off with another man. I knew you were unfaithful." Quentin was on his feet in an instant, placing himself between Florence and Victor. "You threw her out into a storm while she was sick and pregnant," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "She nearly died, so do not stand there and accuse her of anything." "She is my wife," Victor snarled. "You have no right to her." "She was your wife," Reverend Matthews said, standing up as well. "But you abandoned her, Victor. You told anyone who would listen that you wanted nothing to do with her. Quentin here took her in and cared for her when she was at death's door. And now she is his wife, legally married as of this morning, so you have no claim on her anymore." Victor's face turned purple with rage. "You cannot do that. She is still married to me." "Actually, under territorial law, abandonment is grounds for dissolving a marriage," Reverend Matthews said calmly. "Especially when the abandonment endangered the life of the spouse. I took the liberty of filing the necessary paperwork with the territorial courthouse last week when I heard what had happened. Your marriage to Florence was dissolved 3 days ago. She was free to remarry, and she has." Florence had not known about this, and she looked at Quentin in surprise. He met her gaze and shrugged slightly, as if to say he had wanted to make sure everything was legal and proper. Victor looked between them, his hands clenching into fists. For a moment, Florence thought he might try to hit Quentin, but Pete stepped up beside Quentin, and several other men in the restaurant stood as well, making it clear whose side they were on. Victor was not popular in Bonanza, and his treatment of Florence had made him even less so. "This is not over," Victor spat, but he turned and stalked out of the restaurant, slamming the door behind him. Florence found she was shaking, and Quentin immediately returned to her side, his arm going around her shoulders. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "Yes," Florence managed. "Just shaken. I did not expect to see him." "He cannot hurt you anymore," Quentin said firmly. "You are my wife now, and I will protect you." Florence leaned into his strength, grateful beyond words. Around them, the other diners returned to their meals, and Martha patted Florence's hand sympathetically. "That man is a disgrace," she said firmly. "You are well rid of him, my dear. And Quentin is a good man. You have made a wise choice." They finished their meal and headed back to the ranch. The encounter with Victor had shaken Florence, but as they rode through the open country, she felt her tension ease. This was her home now. She was Florence Irving, wife of Quentin Irving, and she was safe. Over the next few weeks, Florence settled into her new life. She took over the cooking and the household chores, taking pleasure in making the cabin into a real home. She tended the chickens and gathered eggs, started a small herb garden near the house, and began mending Quentin's worn clothes. In return, Quentin continued to treat her with unfailing kindness and respect. He had moved back into his bedroom, but he slept on the floor, insisting she should have the bed given her condition. Florence found herself growing more comfortable with him, more at ease. They would sit together in the evenings and talk about everything and nothing. Quentin told her about his childhood in Kansas, about his sister who had died, about his decision to come west and start over. Florence shared her own history, her upbringing in Philadelphia, her decision to marry Victor when he promised her adventure and a new life. "I was so naive," she said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I thought love would be enough, that we would build something together. But Victor only wanted a wife who would stay quiet and not cause him any trouble." "You deserve better than that," Quentin said. "You deserve someone who values your strength and your spirit." Florence looked at him, at the way the fading sunlight caught in his hair and the serious set of his jaw. "I think I have found that," she said softly. Quentin met her gaze, and something passed between them, something warm and full of promise. He reached out and took her hand. "Florence, I know this marriage started as a practical arrangement. But I want you to know that my feelings for you have become very real. I care about you deeply. And when the baby comes, I want to be a real father to the child, not just a name on paper." Florence felt her eyes fill with tears. "I care about you too," she whispered. "More than I thought possible in such a short time. You have given me so much, Quentin. A home, a name, safety. But more than that, you have given me hope again." Quentin stood and drew her up with him, his hands gentle on her arms. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Truly kiss you, not just a formal peck like at the wedding." "Yes," Florence breathed, and then his lips were on hers, warm and sure and full of tenderness. The kiss deepened, and Florence felt something inside her open up, something she had kept locked away during her terrible marriage to Victor. She kissed Quentin back, pouring all her gratitude and growing love into it, and when they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "I am falling in love with you," Quentin said, resting his forehead against hers. "I tried to keep this businesslike and proper. But I cannot help it. You are brave and strong and beautiful, and I want this marriage to be real in every way." "I am falling in love with you too," Florence admitted. "I did not think I could feel this way again after Victor. But you have shown me what real kindness looks like, what real strength is. Not the kind that demands and takes, but the kind that gives and protects." They stood together on the porch as the sun sank below the mountains, holding each other, and Florence felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she was meant to be, with Quentin, building a life together. 2 weeks later, Florence went into labor. It was the middle of the night, and she woke to a sharp pain in her belly that made her gasp. Quentin was beside her in an instant, having moved back into the bedroom to sleep on the floor near her as her time approached. "Is it the baby?" he asked, lighting the lamp with quick, sure movements. "Yes," Florence managed, breathing through another contraction. "I think so." Quentin's face went pale, but his hands were steady as he helped her sit up. "All right. I am going to ride to town and get the midwife. Mrs. Henderson said she would come when it was time." "There is no time," Florence gasped as another contraction hit, harder than the first. "The baby is coming fast." Quentin looked terrified for a moment, but then he squared his shoulders. "All right. I have delivered calves and foals. I can do this. Tell me what you need." What followed was a blur of pain and effort. Quentin boiled water and gathered clean cloths, his movements efficient despite his obvious fear. He held Florence's hand through the contractions, let her squeeze until his bones creaked, murmured encouragement when she was sure she could not go on. The pain was worse than anything she had ever experienced, but Quentin's steady presence kept her grounded. As dawn broke, the baby finally came, sliding into Quentin's waiting hands with a lusty cry. "It is a boy," Quentin said, his voice choked with emotion. "You have a son, Florence." He cleaned the baby with gentle hands and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Florence's arms. She looked down at her son, at his tiny perfect face and shock of dark hair, and felt her heart expand with a love so fierce it took her breath away. "He is beautiful," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He is perfect." Quentin sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders as they both looked at the baby. "What should we name him?" he asked. Florence looked up at him, at this man who had saved her life and now had helped bring her son into the world. "I want him to have your name," she said. "I want him to be your son truly, not Victor's, yours." Quentin's eyes shone with unshed tears. "Are you sure?" "I am sure." "Victor wanted nothing to do with this baby, but you have been here from the beginning. You cared for him before he was even born. You are his father in every way that matters." "Then we will call him James," Quentin said, his voice thick. "After my father, James Irving." "James Irving," Florence repeated, and it sounded right. She looked down at her son, at little James, who was already rooting for her breast. "Welcome to the world, James. You are so loved." The weeks that followed were exhausting but full of joy. Florence recovered from the birth with Quentin's help, and slowly she regained her strength. Quentin proved to be a devoted father, rising in the night to bring the baby to Florence for feeding, walking the floor with James when he was fussy, talking to him in a soft, soothing voice that never failed to calm the infant. Florence watched him with their son and felt her love for him grow deeper every day. This was the life she had dreamed of when she came west, the life she had hoped to have with Victor but never did. A home, a family, a partner who cherished her. It was everything she had wanted and more. One evening, when James was nearly 2 months old, Florence was sitting in the rocking chair nursing him when Quentin came in from his evening chores. He stopped in the doorway, and the look on his face made her breath catch. "What is it?" she asked. "Nothing is wrong," Quentin said, coming to kneel beside the chair. "I was just thinking about how lucky I am, how you and James have made this house into a home, how I cannot imagine my life without you both in it." Florence reached out and ran her fingers through his hair, loving the way it curled slightly at the ends. "We are the lucky ones," she said. "You saved us, Quentin, in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Quentin corrected. He leaned up and kissed her softly. "Florence, I know we have not had a traditional marriage, but I want you to know that my feelings for you are very real. I love you, completely and truly." "I love you too," Florence said, the words coming easily now. "I think I have loved you since you carried me out of the rain." "I just did not know it yet." Quentin's smile was radiant. "I want this to be a real marriage," he said. "In every way. When you are ready, when you feel healed and strong, I want to be your husband fully." Florence felt warmth flood through her at the promise in his words. "I am nearly healed," she said softly. "And I want that too. I want us to be a real family in every sense." That night, after they put James down in the cradle Quentin had built for him, they came together as husband and wife for the first time. Quentin was gentle and patient, mindful of Florence's recent childbirth, and the tenderness between them made the experience beautiful. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, and Florence felt a completeness she had never known before. "I never thought I could be this happy," she whispered into the darkness. "Neither did I," Quentin replied, pulling her closer. "But here we are." The seasons turned and life at the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. James grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, happy baby who smiled at everything and everyone. Florence bloomed in the security of Quentin's love, her body filling out and her face losing the pinched, haunted look it had carried when he first found her. She took joy in the simple tasks of daily life, finding satisfaction in keeping house and tending the garden and caring for her family. Quentin thrived as well, his ranch prospering under his steady management. He hired a few hands to help with the cattle, and the herd grew. He built an addition onto the house, creating more space for their growing family. Because in the spring, Florence discovered she was pregnant again. "Are you happy about it?" she asked Quentin when she told him, suddenly nervous. "I know James is still so young." Quentin swept her up in his arms and spun her around, laughing. "I am thrilled," he said, setting her down and kissing her soundly. "I love being a father. The more children we have, the better." Florence laughed, her fears evaporating. "Well, in that case, you might get your wish. I think this one might be twins." She was right. That fall, she gave birth to twin girls, healthy and strong, with Quentin's blue eyes and her dark hair. They named them Sarah and Grace, and the house was suddenly full of noise and chaos and laughter. Quentin handled it all with his usual steady patience, and Florence marveled at how easily he had taken to fatherhood. He was equally tender with all 3 children, never showing favoritism, always making sure each one felt loved. When the twins were 6 months old, Florence was in town with Quentin picking up supplies when they ran into Victor. He looked terrible, haggard and thin, with the look of a man who had been drinking too much. He stopped when he saw them, his eyes going to the baby Florence held, then to the other 2 babies in the wagon. "So you have replaced me," he said bitterly. Got yourself a new family." "I have the family I should have had all along," Florence replied calmly. She was not afraid of him anymore. He had no power over her. "I hope you are doing well, Victor." "I am doing fine," he lied, and they both knew it. He looked at Quentin with hatred. "You think you are better than me." "I do not think about you at all," Quentin said evenly. "But I do think Florence and these children deserve better than what you gave them, and I am doing my best to provide that." Victor started to say something else, but then he seemed to deflate. "I made mistakes," he muttered. "I know that now, but it is too late." "Yes, it is," Florence said, not unkindly. "Too late for us. But it is not too late for you to make something of your life, Victor. I hope you do." They left him standing there and finished their shopping. As they drove back to the ranch, Florence felt a strange sense of closure. Seeing Victor had not hurt the way she thought it would. She felt only pity for the man he had become and gratitude for the man Quentin was. "Are you all right?" Quentin asked, glancing at her. "I am fine," Florence said, and she meant it. "Better than fine. I am happy, Quentin, truly happy." He reached over and squeezed her hand. "So am I. Every single day I thank God I was there that night when you needed help. You and the children are the best things that ever happened to me." The years continued to pass in a blur of happiness. James grew into a strong, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, learning the ways of the ranch. The twins were wild and adventurous, always getting into mischief but always making everyone laugh. And 2 years after the twins, Florence gave birth to another son, whom they named Thomas after Quentin's father. The ranch prospered, and Quentin became known throughout the territory as a fair and honest man. Other ranchers sought his advice, and he was elected to the town council. Florence became involved in the community as well, helping to establish a school in Bonanza and serving on the church committee. They were respected and well-liked, their rocky start forgotten in the face of the solid life they had built together. One evening, when James was 8 and the twins were 6 and Thomas was 4, the family gathered on the porch to watch the sunset. It had become a tradition, this evening ritual of sitting together and talking about the day. James was telling a story about a calf he had helped deliver that morning. The twins were arguing about who had gathered more eggs, and Thomas was sitting in Quentin's lap, half asleep. Florence looked around at her family, at these people she loved more than life itself, and felt a wave of contentment wash over her. This was everything she had ever wanted, more than she had ever hoped for. Quentin caught her eye and smiled, and she knew he was thinking the same thing. They had both been broken when they found each other, both lost and hurting, but together they had built something beautiful. A home, a family, a love that had only grown stronger with time. "What are you thinking about?" Quentin asked later, after the children were in bed and they were sitting together on the porch in the quiet of the night. "About how lucky I am," Florence said, leaning into his warmth. "About how that terrible night when Victor threw me out was actually the best thing that could have happened to me, because it led me to you." "I was just thinking the same thing," Quentin said, kissing the top of her head. "I was so lonely before you came. I had built this ranch, but it was not really a home until you were here." "We saved each other," Florence said, echoing his words from years before. "We did," Quentin agreed. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Florence, do you ever regret it? Marrying me so quickly, tying yourself to me when you had no other choice?" Florence pulled back to look at him, shocked. "Never," she said fiercely. "Not for one single moment. You are the best man I have ever known, Quentin Irving. You are my partner, my love, the father of my children. Marrying you was the best decision I ever made." Quentin's eyes were bright with emotion. "I love you," he said, his voice rough, "more than I can ever say." "I love you too," Florence replied, "with all my heart." They kissed, long and deep, and Florence felt the same spark she always felt when Quentin touched her. Even after years of marriage, after 4 children and countless days of ordinary life, he could still make her heart race. She suspected he always would. As the years continued to roll by, their love only deepened. They faced challenges, as all families do. There were hard winters and drought summers, sick animals and crop failures, childhood illnesses and the normal struggles of raising children. But they faced it all together, and that made all the difference. James grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with Florence's dark eyes and quick mind. The twins became beautiful young women, spirited and independent, keeping both parents on their toes. Thomas was the quiet one, thoughtful and gentle, with a gift for working with horses. And when Florence was 35 and thought she was done having children, she discovered she was pregnant once more. "Another baby," Quentin said wonderingly, his hand on her still flat belly. "We are going to be busy again." "We never stopped being busy," Florence laughed, but she was happy about the pregnancy. She had always loved being a mother, and the thought of one more child to love filled her with joy. This time, the baby was a girl, tiny and delicate with golden hair and Quentin's blue eyes. They named her Elizabeth, and she was doted on by her older siblings. James, now 15, was fiercely protective of his baby sister. The twins, 13, loved playing with her and dressing her up. And Thomas, at 11, would sit and read to her for hours, his soft voice lulling her to sleep. Quentin was just as smitten. He would carry Elizabeth around the ranch, showing her the horses and the cattle, talking to her as if she understood every word. Florence would watch them together and feel her heart swell with love. This man, this wonderful man who had taken her in when she had nothing, who had loved her when she was at her lowest. He was everything to her. One evening, when Elizabeth was 2 years old, Florence was preparing supper when Quentin came in from the barn. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What is for supper?" he asked. "Stew and fresh bread," Florence replied, leaning back into his embrace. "And apple pie for dessert." "Sounds perfect," Quentin said. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Florence, I was thinking. We have been married for 17 years now. Can you believe it?" 17 years, Florence repeated, marveling. "It has gone so fast." "It has," Quentin agreed. "And every year has been better than the last. You have made me happier than I ever thought possible." He turned her in his arms so she was facing him. "I wanted to thank you for saying yes all those years ago, for taking a chance on me, for building this life with me. You are everything to me, Florence, you and the children." Florence felt tears prick her eyes. "You do not need to thank me," she said. "You saved my life, Quentin. You and the children are my whole world." "We saved each other," Quentin said again and kissed her. It was a kiss full of years of love and partnership, of shared joys and weathered storms, of a bond that had only grown stronger with time. As the sun set over the mountains and their children played in the yard, Florence and Quentin stood together in the kitchen of the home they had built, holding each other. They had come so far from that rainy night in Bonanza when he had found her collapsed in the mud. She had been broken and desperate, and he had been lonely and isolated. But together they had created something beautiful. A family, a home, a love that would last a lifetime. The years continued to pass. James took over more of the ranch work, preparing to one day run the place himself. The twins both married good men from neighboring ranches, creating alliances that strengthened their family's position in the community. Thomas proved to have a gift with horses and started a breeding program that became famous throughout Colorado. And Elizabeth grew into a bright, cheerful girl who loved learning and reading and who wanted to be a teacher when she grew up. Quentin and Florence grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces gaining lines. But their love never wavered. They were still each other's best friend, still each other's greatest support. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sunset, talking about the day and their children and grandchildren who had started to arrive. One day, when Florence was 60, she was sorting through old papers and came across the marriage certificate from her wedding to Victor. She had kept it all these years, not sure why. Looking at it now, at Victor's name scrawled next to hers, she felt nothing but a distant sadness for the girl she had been, the one who had thought that marriage would last. Quentin found her sitting with the paper, and he sat down beside her. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. "I am fine," Florence said. "I was just thinking about how different my life could have been if you had not found me that night, if you had not been kind. I would have died in that street and the baby with me. But I did find you," Quentin said, taking her hand. "And you survived, and James was born, and we built this beautiful life together. That is what matters." Florence looked at him, at this man who had been her rock for over 40 years, and smiled. "You are right. That is what matters." She tore the marriage certificate in half, then in quarters, and tossed it into the fire. "That life is over. This is the life that was meant to be." "This is the life that was meant to be," Quentin agreed and kissed her temple. "And I would not change a single moment of it." As they sat together watching the paper burn, Florence reflected on the long journey that had brought her here. From that terrible night when Victor had thrown her out, to Quentin finding her in the rain, to their wedding and the birth of their children, to all the years of joy and struggle and love that had followed. It had not been an easy path, but it had been worth every step. The ranch prospered under James's management, and he and his wife gave Quentin and Florence many grandchildren. The twins had children of their own, and Thomas married a sweet girl from town and started his own horse ranch nearby. Elizabeth became a teacher, just as she had dreamed, and opened a school for girls in Denver. The family remained close, gathering often for holidays and celebrations, and the house that Quentin had built was always full of noise and laughter and love. When Quentin was 75, he began to slow down. His body, worn from years of hard work, began to fail him, but his mind remained sharp, and his love for Florence never dimmed. She cared for him tenderly, repaying the kindness he had shown her all those years ago when she was the one who was sick and weak. One evening, as they sat together on the porch in the summer twilight, Quentin took Florence's hand. "I want you to know," he said quietly, "that loving you has been the greatest joy of my life. Every moment with you has been a gift." Florence felt tears stream down her face. "Do not talk like that," she said, though she knew what he was telling her. "You are not going anywhere." "We both know my time is coming," Quentin said gently. "But I am not afraid. I have lived a full, happy life. I have loved and been loved. I have children and grandchildren who will carry on after I am gone. That is all anyone can ask for." "I cannot imagine life without you," Florence whispered. "You will manage," Quentin said. "You are the strongest person I know, and you will not be alone. You have our children and grandchildren. They will take care of you." He squeezed her hand. "But I hope I have a bit more time yet. I am not ready to leave you." And he did have more time, 3 more precious years. Years in which they sat together and told stories to their grandchildren. Years in which they watched their family grow and flourish. Years in which they held each other and remembered all the moments that had brought them to this place. When Quentin finally passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, with Florence holding his hand, it was with the knowledge that he had lived a good life and had been deeply loved. Florence mourned him, as was natural, but she did not let grief consume her. She had their children and grandchildren to think of, and she knew Quentin would want her to keep living, to keep finding joy in the world. She stayed on the ranch, helping James and spending time with her growing family. And every evening at sunset, she would sit on the porch in the rocking chair Quentin had built for her all those years ago, and she would think about the man who had saved her life and given her everything she had ever wanted. She lived to be 85 years old, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a beloved matriarch who was known for her kindness and wisdom and the deep love she had shared with her husband. When she finally passed away peacefully one spring morning, her family laid her to rest beside Quentin on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the mountains in the distance. The ranch continued to prosper under James and his descendants, and the story of Quentin and Florence became family legend, passed down through the generations. The story of how a cowboy had found a desperate woman in the rain and had saved her life, and how that act of kindness had bloomed into a love that lasted a lifetime. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there could be hope, and that love could heal even the deepest wounds. And on summer evenings, when the sun set over the Colorado mountains and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the family would gather on the porch of the house Quentin had built, and they would tell the story again. Of Florence and Quentin, of a love that had started in desperation and grown into something beautiful and lasting. A love that had created a family and a legacy that would endure for generations to come. The wind would whisper through the grass, carrying with it the scent of wildflowers and sage, and it seemed almost as if Quentin and Florence were there too, sitting together as they always had, holding hands and watching the sunset. Their bodies were gone, but their love remained, woven into the very fabric of the ranch and the family they had created. It was a love that had conquered fear and hardship and doubt, a love that had proven stronger than death itself. And so the story ended not with sadness but with joy. Joy for a life well lived, for a love fully realized, for a family that would carry forward the legacy of two people who had found each other in the darkest hour and had built a future full of light. It was the kind of ending that felt right, the kind that brought peace and satisfaction. Because Quentin and Florence had not just survived their trials, they had triumphed over them, and in doing so, they had created something that would last forever.